keep your eye on China. The trade war is beginning to take its toll on China as the Chinese economy is losing momentum. Beijing has pledged to increase small business lending and increase infrastructure investment to help offset the impact. Ting Lu, chief China economist at Nomura International in Hong Kong, said, for example, the Chinese economy will get worse before getting better. It takes several months to turn around. Beijing will step up credit easing and fiscal measures to deliver a recovery and prevent financial troubles such as a rise of bond defaults. But with a debt-to-GDP ratio of about 250%, China is already well into the danger zone. How much more debt-financed stimulus can it take? Research by economists Kenneth Rogoff and Carmen Reinhardt indicates that debt-to-GDP becomes a drag on the economy at 90%. The Chinese financial sector, banks, insurance, asset management, shadow banking, etc., is totally insolvent. Consumers' savings have been used to finance ghost cities, white elephants, capital flight, Ponzi schemes, bribes and kickbacks. There are some real assets to show their trends are the best in the world and some growth, but not nearly enough to cover the liabilities that have been created in the form of bank deposits, corporate bonds, wealth management products, intercompany loans, etc. On the other hand, China has enough in hard currency reserves to clean up the mess. China will need hard currency in addition to yuan money printing to handle the external dollar-denominated debt. The policy issue for China, therefore, is when and how they go about the cleanup. If China moves too quickly, they risk slowing the economy, slowing job creation, and delegitimizing the Communist Party. If China waits too long, they risk an uncontrolled panic and a liquidity crisis, which can grow far worse than the initial problem through contagion. Chinese contagion also has the potential to go global. Given this dilemma, China is trying a Goldilocks approach of not too fast and not too slow. This Goldilocks plan has 3 parts. 1. Keep the problem from getting worse than it already is. 2. Shut down the worst institutions in a relatively transparent, no-drama manner. 3. Play for time with regard to the rest of the financial system and try to grow out of the problem. Will China be able to pull off this Goldilocks approach to a potential credit crisis? Of course not. Nobody's that good or that lucky. Still, the communists will try and may be able to keep the greatest Ponzi scheme in history afloat in China for another year or so. The endgame is still a financial crisis that the Chinese won't see coming. In that case, China's only solutions are to close the capital account, devalue the currency, nationalize the financial sector, and put the malefactors in jail. This story is getting worse because of the escalating trade war that shows no signs of letting up. On top of it, we now must add an emerging markets crisis as the crisis in Turkey threatens a spillover. The problem here is contagion. History shows that once a single nation defaults, creditors lose confidence in other emerging markets. Those creditors begin to cash out investments in EMs across the board and a panic begins. Once that happens, even the stronger countries such as China lose reserves rapidly and end up in default. In the worst case, a full-scale global liquidity crisis could commence, which would be worse than 2008. I'll be keeping a close eye on the situation. Add it all up and the Chinese financial sector is caught in a vice. The result could very well be a financial meltdown of unprecedented magnitude in China with the potential to go global and cause a market collapse in Europe and the US as well. In one version of the old Goldilocks fairy tale, she is almost eaten by the 3 bears but manages to escape the cottage and run into the woods. It's not at all obvious the communist Chinese will be so lucky. Shooting war with China more likely than you think. The mainstream media narrative about the US-China trade war implies that Trump is on a highly damaging ego trip and China holds all the cards. The exact opposite is true. Trump has ample financial warfare weapons including tariffs, penalties, bans on direct investment, improved cybersecurity, forced divestiture and freezing of assets. Meanwhile, China has almost run out of room to impose tariffs. Further, they will invite retribution if they try to devalue their currency further. China's vulnerabilities run deeper than that. The U.S.-China trade war comes in the aftermath of a Chinese Communist Party conference that made Jinping dictator for life and enshrined his doctrines on the same level as Mao Zedong. Once got these powers, he proceeded on a disastrous policy course that has resulted in a slowdown of the Chinese economy, higher debt defaults, lost investment opportunities in the U.S., and declining hard currency reserves. The knives are now out in Beijing. Reports are circulating that Levin's opponents are questioning his judgment and the wisdom of expanding his powers at such a critical time. Many are starting to blame Levin for the trade war almost as much as they blame Trump. Levin still has torture, firing squads and concentration camps at his disposal, but the notion of a unified, coherent leadership structure in Beijing is now seen to be a myth. Trump will keep up the pressure. He never backs off and always doubles down. It will be up to Levin to blink and acquiesce in many U.S. demands. The U.S. will win this trade war because Levin does not want to lose his throne. Yet there will still be material damage to the global economy and lasting animosity between Levin and Trump. But there's more to the U.S.-China dispute than trade. Yes, headlines and TV interviews are dominated by talk of the trade war. That escalating confrontation is a big deal, but it's not the only flashpoint in U.S.-China relations, and not even the most important. China is as much concerned about a military confrontation in the South China Sea as it is about the economic confrontation in the trade wars. China dredged sand surrounding useless rocks and atolls in the South China Sea and converted them into artificial islands and then built out the islands to include naval ports, Air Force landing strips, anti-aircraft weapons, and other defensive and offensive weapons systems. Not only are the Chinese militarizing rocks, but they are trampling on competing claims by the Philippines, Vietnam, Brunei, Malaysia and other countries surrounding the sea. China is claiming control based on ancient imperial arrangements and argues that the West and its South Asian allies stole the territory from them. The answer is that both the ancient claims and the theft narrative are open to dispute. More to the point, the world has developed rules-based platforms for resolving these issues without military force. The U.S. is guaranteeing freedom of passage, freedom of the seas and the territorial rights of allies such as the Philippines. Incidentally, I was at Norfolk Naval Base last week delivering a lecture on financial warfare with China. There was a hurry-up feel to it, a definite sense of urgency. I got the impression that something must be up. So far, the U.S.-Chinese confrontation has been about naval vessels passing in close quarters and surveillance aircraft being harassed by fighter jets. The risk of such tactics is an accidental collision, a rogue shot fired or a command misunderstood. Any such incident could lead to retaliation, and there's no telling where it might stop. Trump is not someone to back down, and Chinese leadership does not want to appear weak before the U.S. It's especially true at a time of great economic uncertainty. Communist Party leadership is desperate to maintain the support of the people, or else it risks losing the mandate of heaven. China does not want war at this time. But diverting the people's attention away from domestic problems toward a foreign foe is an old trick leaders use to unite the people in times of uncertainty. Rallying the people around the flag is a tried and true method to garner support. If China's leadership decides that the risk of losing legitimacy at home outweighs the risk of conflict with the United States, the likelihood of war rises dramatically. I'm not predicting it, but wars have started over less. As Mick Jagger sang, a U.S.-China war is just a shot away.